This happened when I was about 17, so early 2000s. Where I grew up, it gets pretty cold, and decent snowfall is common. There was a mid-sized snowstorm rolling through that night. My father was an electrician and had gone out to a service call a few towns over. My mom and I were at home with the news on, keeping an eye on school closures for the next day when the phone rang. She picked it up. It was my dad. Right away, by her reaction, I could tell something wasn't right. I sat down next to her on the couch so I could hear his voice through the receiver. He said another vehicle had gotten too close, and in trying to avoid it, he slid off the road and hit a tree. He told us he was bleeding but okay and that he'd already called 911. He gave us the road name. It was a back road between our town and the next. Then, in the middle of talking, he just goes quiet for a second and says something like, "Hold on, the other driver is getting out." Then there was just silence on the line before we heard muffled yelling and what sounded like something hitting glass. My dad shouted something we couldn't make out. Then the call cut off. My mom tried calling back right away, but he didn't pick up. She grabbed her coat and keys, said it was only 10 minutes away and that we weren't waiting. The driving was slow, with snow coming down in big clumps. The wipers barely kept up. My mom kept trying his phone, but none of her calls got picked up. When we got to the road, it was mostly untouched snow except for tire ruts. We followed them until we saw hazard lights blinking through the trees. My dad's truck was nose down in a ditch against a tree. It looked bad. The whole front of the truck was caved in, and the driver's side door hung open with the window smashed. My mom parked and we got out. Across the road was another truck with a snowplow rig on the front. The engine was running, but nobody was in it. There was no sign of my dad or the other driver. Then, from the side of the road, we hear something. We turn around and this guy walks up over the shoulder. He had on a Carhartt jacket, hoodie, gloves, and was carrying a flashlight. Basically looked like any guy you'd see clearing driveways. He waved and said he saw the wreck from up the road, pulled over to help, but didn't find anyone around. My mom explained to him that we were the family of the man from the truck in the ditch. The guy said he saw another car leaving right when he arrived, and if my dad was injured, maybe he went with them to the hospital or something, and that's probably where we should go. This was a little strange. We had heard my dad on the phone say he had already called 911, and then he was basically screaming when the call dropped. Something wasn't adding up. Then, from behind the guy's plow truck, we see something in the taillight. It was my dad. My dad started yelling to us, "Get away from him, get back in the car." That's when it clicked. My mom grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the car. As soon as we started walking, the guy was coming toward us, fishing something out of his pocket. The instant we were in the car and shut the doors, this guy was yanking on the driver's side door handle, trying to open it. My mom started screaming and freaking out. Then, this guy hits the window with something hard, like the hilt of a knife. I don't know how it didn't break. Out of nowhere, my dad slams into this guy, sending him stumbling backwards and falling down, then yells for my mom to get the hell out of there. Right then, headlights and emergency lights start coming around the bend in the road. The guy gets to his feet, runs back to his truck, and takes off the other way while my dad waves down the ambulance and cruiser, pointing at the guy's vehicle. The cruiser slowed, put down the window, then took off in the direction of the truck after my dad explained the situation. I guess what had happened was the truck had intentionally run him off the road, but my dad didn't know it was on purpose at first. He did, however, know who it was. I guess that guy used to work for the same company as my dad, but was fired for stealing from clients' homes. The guy lost his job and basically spiraled into some really dark stuff like drugs and drinking. My dad had nothing to do with the guy getting fired, but he must have recognized the logo on the truck and it set him off. My dad had to literally crawl out the passenger side door while the guy smashed in the driver's side window. They caught the guy later that night. He didn't even deny running my dad off the road. It's been years now, and my dad is no longer with us, but every time I visit that area, I think about that story. That guy was hunting my dad when we got there, and who knows what would have happened if the cops didn't show up when they did. This isn't my story, it was my grandfather's. He told it to us many times throughout his life, and he swore until the day he died that it was true. He was a real man's man from a different time, like early 1900s in the Yukon during prospecting years. He worked for a mining company. He was basically the guy they sent ahead to see if an area was worth investing resources in. So the story goes that this one winter they dropped him at a supply cabin near a creek. It was 2 days by sled from the main camp. Basically, he would live there for a handful of days, hike around, map an area that hadn't been hit yet, and try to locate any potential mining opportunities. He'd make a bunch of notes and drawings and wait for the sled to pick him back up. He told us that on the first day when he got there, he and the sled driver immediately noticed that the cabin door had been destroyed. It looked like a bear had busted it down and rummaged through the cabin. Together, they repaired it before the sled driver took off. The cabin was one room, little windows you couldn't crawl through, a wood stove, cot, and a table. He brought with him a shotgun, lamp, traps, and some food. So the week goes normal until the second to last day, when he finds something along the edge of the creek. Footprints. He said the prints were huge, like 3 of his hands put together in a row. He tracked them from the edge of the woods where the snow turned to soil, down to the creek and back again. His first thought was it was a bear, but the stride didn't look right. I never knew my grandfather to be scared of anything, but whenever he got to this part of the story, something in him always changed. You could just feel him kind of detach and get uncomfortable. He said the night before his pickup, he was falling asleep, fire crackling in the stove. Everything else was dead quiet. Then, out of the silence, this long howl rolls through the woods. In all the times he told the story, he never expressed even the slightest possibility that it was a wolf. He said it was a deeper sound and borderline human. He stood up and went over to one of the small windows. Looking out under the moonlight, he scanned up and down the creek. That's when he saw it. There was a dark shape crouched at the bank. Big, dark, and close to the ground. His first thought was bear, but it was hunched like a person. And then the shape moved an arm. It was scooping water into its mouth. He said when he saw that, he realized this was not any kind of animal he'd ever seen, and reflexively moved back from the window. When he did, he accidentally kicked the crate that the lamp was sitting on, knocking it over. The glass shattered on the floor. When he turned back to the window, the shape was standing up, facing the cabin. He said it was like a man, but larger and heavier, and was hunched over even when it stood up all the way. He couldn't see the face or snout of it, just the silhouette, and that it looked covered in hair. Then it started moving. It began walking away from the water and toward the timber before disappearing out of sight. He killed the fire because he didn't want any light leaking. The cabin went completely dark, and he just sat on the cot with the shotgun across his lap, listening. He said he sat there for what must have been 5 minutes when there was a sound outside. Something was moving around the back of the cabin. Then there was another sound, When he would tell the story, he would reach out and run his hand flat against the nearest wall and say that was the exact sound. He said it went all the way around the outside of the cabin to the front where the door was when it stopped. Then, the cabin door rattled with a thud. Something had pushed on it so hard it rattled the whole frame, including the latch and brace. When that happened, my grandfather said he did the only thing he could think to do. He took the shotgun, smashed the barrel through one of the little windows, and started firing shells off into the air. He said he went deaf for the next 3 minutes, and it was the most terrifying few minutes of his life because he didn't know if the thing had left or not. After that, his hearing returned, and there were no other sounds from outside. Nothing, just silence. He did what he could do to reinforce the door, then just sat in front of it, wrapped in blankets, shotgun aimed at it, till he heard the sled team the next afternoon. He never took that post again, and as I understand it, there was a guy who disappeared going back there about a year later. The sled team went to pick him up, but he was just gone, with the cabin door busted down again. So that was my grandfather's story. Till the day he died, his answer, no matter who asked him, was that it was nothing but the total truth. I've lived alone in the same house for the last 10 years. This was during a blizzard somewhere in the 2010-2017 range. It was one of those big ones they kept calling like Snowmageddon or whatever. My place is a small 2-story home at the end of a woodsy, dead-end street toward the edge of a suburb. The night the storm was rolling in, I got off work late and did the usual panic run for food, water, batteries, and all that. By the time I parked in my driveway, snow was already stacking on the hood. I ate an early dinner and got everything in order so that when and if the power went out, I wouldn't have to go hunting around for things in the dark. I've had storms knock the power out here for days at a time, so around 9 o'clock I was filling the tub with water just in case when I thought I heard something from downstairs. I turned off the water and listened. It came again. A knock from my front door. I got up and walked downstairs, turned on the porch light and looked out the little diamond window next to the door. Someone in a hooded jacket and pulled-up scarf was standing at the front door. It didn't look like anyone I recognized, so instead of opening the door, I called out asking who it was. A man's voice came from the other side. He said his car died and that he needed to use a phone to call his friend and pick him up. I thought it was odd that the guy didn't have a cell phone. There was also something about his tone that didn't sit right with me. There wasn't like a, "Hey, sorry to bother you, could you help me out" feeling to him. It was more like a "let me in because I said so" vibe. I didn't open the door. Instead, I said I could make the call for him if he wanted. He didn't answer, just stood there facing the door. After maybe 10 seconds, he just turns around and walks off the porch, down the street and into the blizzard. I felt a little bit like a jerk, but I also had offered to make the call for him and he hadn't taken me up on it, so I said whatever and forgot about it. I did one more lock check around the house, went up to my bedroom and went to sleep with the TV on. Sometime in the night, I woke up. Everything was dark and the TV was off. This was the telltale sign that the power had gone out. I buried myself back in the blankets and rolled over, but something felt wrong. It seemed way colder than it should have been. I tried to ignore it, but I kept feeling like I was freezing no matter how many blankets I had on me. So I decided to get up and make sure everything was good. I got out of bed, unplugged my phone, walked to my bedroom doorway, opened it, and stepped out. In the hallway, I felt a freezing cold draft pulling past me. I followed it to the stairs and walked down to the living room. Before I even hit the last step, I saw it. Snow was inside the house, like an actual drift across the rug and up against the coffee table. I stepped down off the stairs and looked to my right. The front door was wide open. Snow had piled along the threshold and was blowing inside. I set my phone down on a side table and shut the door. I didn't know what the hell was going on or how I hadn't heard this happen. I walked toward the kitchen to get a broom and dustpan to sweep up what snow I could when I stepped in something wet. I looked down, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints, leading away from the living room down the hall. I turned down the hall and followed them, keeping my steps as quiet as possible. They ended outside the laundry room. I stopped just before it and leaned only enough to peek around the door frame. It was pitch dark in there when it happened. A lighter sparked. Someone was in my laundry room lighting a cigarette. As soon as the lighter sparked, I yelled out, just pure reflex. When I did, the person immediately stood up like I had scared them and started coming toward the doorway. I backed up, turned, and started running toward the stairs, straight up to my bedroom, pushed the door shut, and locked it. Then I went to my nightstand to get my phone and called 911. That's when I realized I had left it downstairs. I had set it down when I went to close the front door. Right then, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. They weren't even trying to be quiet, just thudding up the stairs. The steps reached the top of the stairs, came down the hallway, and stopped outside my bedroom. Then, the handle moved and the lock caught it. I bluffed and yelled out that I had called the cops and that they were on the way. A man spoke through the door. He said he would leave and not to call anyone. I yelled back that I already had and to get out. The door handle moved again. Then I heard him walk back down the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door. I watched through the window as he walked across my driveway and back down the street through the storm. I ran back downstairs, got my phone, and called the cops. Obviously, it took them a long time to get there. In the meantime, the power came back on. I gave them my description of the guy I had seen on my porch earlier that night, but it wasn't particularly helpful. Once the storm passed, they were able to come back out and give a more extensive look around. It turns out a neighbor reported seeing someone near their shed that same evening, and the cops believed he stole something that he used to pry open my front door. When something like this happens in your home, it permanently messes with your head. It's a huge violation of your sense of security. And even now, all these years later, I still wake up fearing that someone has broken in and is hiding somewhere in my house.